Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy, and today is Monday, September 6th, 2021. I think this is a really important uh, topic that we're going to talk about tonight, self-sabotage. And I think it's important because it, like a lot of behaviors, will oftentimes induce in us the exact opposite response than is ideal. Having said that, at the outset, there's something that I want to cover from the beginning today that I've been thinking a lot about lately. More and more often, I'm having the thought that as I talk about and teach about parenting ideas, parent thinking, your own evolution in this, I want to be very clear that being who you are, your imperfect self, is okay. In fact, in a lot of ways, I was thinking about it today that if we could embrace our imperfect self, right? If we could allow ourselves to be imperfect, allow ourselves to be authentic, forgive ourselves, of course, when we're authentic, and ask our children for forgiveness, in so many ways, um, we would be modeling for them a kind of safety that it's okay to be who you are. My therapist has said to me on more than one occasion when I've come to a session talking about a mistake that I'd made in therapy and the way that I responded to my children, she said to me, in some ways, it's better that you got it wrong this time because then your children are reminded that you don't always get it right, and it de-shames the experience of getting it wrong for them. They don't have to hold up this defense and this illusion of perfection. So as we talk about self-sabotage tonight, I wanted to start off with that idea that this isn't about getting it perfect. This isn't about not making mistakes, but it's all part of an evolution. And along the way, and as far as I can tell, we will continue to make mistakes in this process. But for tonight, I'll talk about self-sabotage first as it relates to our children, and later as it relates to us, and how we can frame it in our minds in such a way that we won't be as inclined to be triggered, be as inclined to react the ways that aren't helpful for the process. I think it's really important to understand the idea of primary and secondary gain. I don't know if you've heard of those phrases before, but they can be really helpful. When we talk about primary gain, essentially we're talking about the reason for a behavior is to reduce distress or anxiety. If you think about biting your fingernails, part of the primary gain is that there's an energy there that gets taken up, and a focus there gets taken up by trimming our fingernails with our teeth. Even though it can become an obsessive behavior, it still serves that purpose to reduce or to channel our anxiety into something manageable. Secondary gain is the benefits that we get in relationships. So using the example from the nail biting example, besides just my anxiety having a place to go, a place to sit, I might also get attention from a parent or from an authority figure or from a friend or a partner telling me not to do it, reminding me, stopping me. So there are gains that are had that are intrinsic, and there are gains that are had that are in relationship. It's very important because tonight, we're going to talk most importantly about really kind of getting rid of what I think is an expression of incredulity, excuse me, of being incredulous. I think sometimes we say about our children or about others out there, we say, I can't understand what they're doing. And some of us at some times know we can relate exactly to what they're doing. We don't like it. We wish it were different, but we can definitely understand what other people are doing. And understanding primary and secondary gain, it increases our intellectual and emotional intelligence, and so we can't hide behind that false idea, that false narrative that we don't get it. Primary gain refers to a reduction in anxiety and produces positive internal motivations. The gain may not be particularly evident to the outside observer. The removal of the emotional conflict or the relief of anxiety, that is the immediate benefit of a defense mechanism or neurotic symptom. So again, a reduction in anxiety and distress. Secondary gain can also be a component of any disease, but is an external motivator. These may, but not need to be, recognized by the patient. Secondary gain may simply be an unconscious psychological component of symptoms, and other personality characteristics. Any advantage, as increased attention, disability benefits, or release from unpleasant responsibilities obtained as a result of having an illness, is a secondary gain. One of the things that happens with secondary gains is that expectations are reduced. We'll talk about that tonight. And so when expectations are reduced, I have successfully impacted my environment to relieve me of the pressure that's being put on me. That's primary and secondary gain. Most importantly, and it's probably the thing that I spend the most time talking and teaching about, not just to parents, but also to therapists, is to remember that there's a function for the symptom. Of all the things I teach, probably the thing that people agree with me, professionals specifically, agree with me the most about, but have the most difficult time putting into practice, is connecting to the function of the symptom. What does the symptom do for the patient, do for the client, do for the person? So asking why he or she does this, on one level, we might think about it as sabotaging themselves, but on another level, it serves some greater purpose. So when people talk about low motivation for their children, my response is, well, they may not be motivated to do the thing that you want them to do, but they're definitely motivated by something. And the symptomatic behavior serves them in some ways very, very effectively. Similar to when I talk and teach about the fact that psychotherapy, in essence, is listening to somebody well enough to be able to hear their story, to hear and perceive their context in such a way where everything that they're doing makes perfect sense. But we repeat the phrase so often as parents, I don't know why she's doing this. I don't know why they're doing this. And really, we're subtly trying to shame them. It's one of the ways that I most commonly have shamed my children. And I become aware in very specific, intense moments when I've asked my children for a reason for their behavior, and they've actually told me the truth. And it got me more angry. Because really what I was saying by offering my question, why did you do this? I was really saying, why did you do this, you idiot? So to be able to reframe self-sabotage as somehow self-serving is really, really important. Why are they hanging out with the negative friends? Why are they cutting on themselves? Why are they abusing substances? Why are they violating everything in the behavioral contract that we've set up? I caught a couple of minutes of the press conference with the tennis player. I believe her name is Naomi Osaka, if I'm not mistaken. I think Osaka is her last name. She was rated third coming into the U.S. Open in New York, and she lost her match fairly early on. And she gave a very honest and emotional press conference. And at one point she said, you know, losing and playing tennis isn't giving me, winning and playing tennis isn't giving me the joy. In fact, when I win, I don't feel joy. I feel relief. And I think all of us can relate to that. The expectations, right? The wanting to please, the wanting to perform becomes so overwhelming that when we meet expectations, we don't experience that intrinsic joy that comes from accomplishment or achieving something. We really just feel relieved that we're not going to disappoint our parents or disappoint people or fall below expectations. We have to really learn to listen to ourselves and to others. I don't know that I've quite said this, what I'm about to say, if ever, but in a long time. And the key, and this is it, the key, I can't emphasize this enough actually. The key to understanding your child is to understand you. The more you're able to plumb the depths of you, to understand yourself, the more you're going to be able to understand other people. And so when we say we don't get it, we don't get what they're doing, we're really not in touch with ourselves, because everybody can relate to what people label as self-sabotaging behaviors at times. So we have to really lean into the answer. I used to say, it's okay to ask me or even your child, why are you doing this once or maybe twice or maybe three times if you're really a slow listener. But to keep repeating it is an obvious manipulation, an obvious shaming technique. So often when I offer reasons, kind of a pathway that explains why children or partners are doing what they're doing, it doesn't land on people because they don't have the awareness to see themselves in it. So like I talk about in every single broadcast and every single page of the book that I write and every single lecture that I give, the key to the universe is you. Everything you need to know is right inside of here, inside of you. And that will be the key that unlocks the door to understanding your children. It's hard. We're not that motivated to really go into ourselves as much because we don't experience ourselves as the problem. We actually experience our children as the problem, or our partners as the problem, or people out there as the problem. And this convenient projection outward of the problem leaves us in a pretty vulnerable spot because then the solution has to be out there. We don't realize that the way we're living our life and our relationship to the people that we care about, that we love, that we relate to, is the reason for our happiness or our unhappiness. Parsimony is this principle that oftentimes it's the most simple explanation. I've shared this before, that I had a friend that was very successful in the music business. And among other things, one of the symbols or the artwork of some of their early music had a lot of satanic symbols associated with it. And after getting to know this person, I asked them the question, why so much emphasis on this kind of provocative symbolism? And his answer to me was, we just wanted to pick the thing that we thought would piss off parents the most. So it's right there. It's that simple. Part of the anger, part of the vulgarity in music, part of the sexism and the misogyny and the violence that we see in music or that we hear in music is intended to cause you to react the exact way that you're going to react. So often, one of the questions that I tell parents to ask is, isn't this exactly how you're supposed to be feeling? Isn't this what your child wants you to feel? So the idea of assuming the most simple answer might be the answer, to create separation from mom and dad, an identity separation. I am you, I am not you. I am me and you are not me. As we get better and do this work, as you all know, we allow the answer to come slowly. And we know, the more work we do, that the most important thing is for the child or the partner to arrive at the answer themselves. We therapists are using the old adage of give a person a fish and feed him for a day, but teach him how to fish and feed him for a lifetime. We therapists are supposed to be good at fishing, experienced at fishing. We kind of know where to look. We know what bait to use. We can foretell and take some guesses at where the pain might be. Maybe it's the adoption, maybe it's the divorce, maybe it's the learning difference, maybe it's culture's emphasis on body image, whatever it is. But really, it's most important that the individual discovers it themselves. And what some of these bullet points really illuminate is, if we thought in these ways, we would relax a little, right? We would know that this is the part of the onion opening, right? Of getting down to the layers. In some ways, somebody asked me about this, and I'll go more in detail in our Q&A later this week. But somebody asked me about my analogy last time of kind of undressing your children by being able to see through their defenses and kind of expose it, calling them on it. Not only is that humiliating and that will probably cause them to go back into hiding, but it's more important that they discover it than that we're able to see it with our crystal ball. Seeing the issue, understanding the issue, informs us how we might respond to be most effective or less effective. But really, this life is about them figuring it out. That's why wilderness therapy can be so helpful, because the distance it gets created, the fact that you're communicating primarily through letters, means that they're off on their own journey, figuring it out in a context that's not you, that's not at home. And in the meantime, ideally, you're focusing on and spending your energy working on you. So we put them in a situation. I kind of think of wilderness therapy as this kind of psychological funnel where all the distractions, the defenses are removed. Most of them, many of them are removed. And so the person is kind of funneled into being compelled to talk about it, to feel what's really at the root of things. If we can remain curious, think about being scared and being angry, being frustrated, being disappointed, being proud. Think about any response that parents would have to a child. If we could replace that with curiosity, we would become a much more adequate container. In other words, that's a psychological term for we'd be able to hold our children with greater patience and compassion. The practice of trying to be curious is an extraordinarily helpful thing for them and for us. Curiosity means that we don't know. I was talking to a client this morning about a couple of decisions, and I said, I can see pros and cons in both ways. And I don't quite know your life, so I can't really advise you to go one direction, but we can talk about kind of the losses and the gains from each of the decision, and then you get to choose your life. Try to relate if you can. I think one of the most emotionally dishonest things that we can do, that we do often, is to not relate to our children. Peer pressure. Let's use peer pressure as a simple example. Teens and young adults are famously compromised by peer pressure. Most adults will say that. They're too consumed, they're too narcissistic, they're too self-centered, they're too obsessed with what other people think of them. They wear clothes, they listen to music, they try to fit in to an extreme, to the point that it gets very, very harmful. And as I hear adults and parents and teachers and society talk about that, I'm thinking, you're all struggling with it. We all struggle with peer pressure. None of us are completely detached from how other people see us. We might have made progress since we were teens. I hope so. But we worry about keeping up with the Joneses. We worry about what it means if we walk into an Al-Anon or an AA meeting or a therapy session. If our child throws a tantrum, if our child drops out of high school or college because of drug addiction. Most of us aren't free with that information, even the parts of it that are our story to tell, because of shame, because of fear. So try to relate, try to see yourself in the other person. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but the more I talk about this in the field with the clients all the time, the healthier we get, the more we evolve, the more we grow, the more we see similarities between ourselves and others. The less evolved we are, the less emotionally intelligent we are, the less open we are to the process, the more we see differences. We see the other as other. If you peel back a few layers, self-sabotage, like all symptoms, makes perfect sense. It's completely rational. Osaka, the tennis player I was mentioning earlier, she said in the press conference, I don't know when I'll play again. She gave a very raw and honest interview. It'd be worth looking at. And I thought it was courageous and amazing and honest. And what she's doing is she's saying, I need to take care of my safe self. It's not about not winning tennis matches or not being a great tennis player, but something else is more important, and she's willing to face it. Anytime that people are going through transitions, before, during, and after transitions, self-sabotage or regression is a part of that. That's another thing. Sometimes self-sabotage, you can think of it most simply as regression. And regression is triggered by stress. And stress is put on people when others expect something of them. That's why I've been writing about my social media lately, and even did a live interview and a live share recently, where I've been teaching that be mellow with your praise. Try to avoid saying phrases like, I'm proud of you. It's too intense. It loads too heavily. You can say, nice job, congratulations, good work. Fantastic, excellent. But when a parent's anxiety for a child's sense of worth goes so great that they try to instill in the child a sense of self-worth through praise, the child feels the pressure. That they feel like if they don't do it, if they don't continue to do it, then they're going to experience the opposite of what they're experiencing right now, which is disappointment, embarrassment. So they'd rather take control of the situation and just fail or not try. Osaka deciding to step away from tennis is a very, very wise thing. She's got to sort out her psychology before she goes back to play tennis again, or she wants to. Figure it out. I don't believe in a fear of success. I've just never felt it. I've never met it. I think fear of success and fear of failure are the same thing. I know this from the research on grit and resilience. I know this. Look up growth mindset or fixed mindset. Carol Dweck, Dr. Carol Dweck is a nice reference. And we know that praising children's giftedness, talents, potential leads to them cheating, quitting, and selecting tasks that are easier that they have a better chance of mastering or being successful at. So even when we see children thriving and we lather praise on them, their experience is like Osaka's, there's nowhere to go but down. People have already crowned me. This is in essence what I'm guessing happened with Simone Biles. She was at the outset of the Olympics crowned as the greatest Olympic athlete to ever walk the face of the earth. There was nothing to gain by trying to win any of the medals. It was overwhelming for her. Part of, like I said, the function of the symptom of failing and sabotaging yourself is people's expectations get lowered. Think about this. I've seen it from the parent side over the years. When a child fails or drops out of school or gets arrested or has an overdose or whatever it is, ends up in a mental place that treats mental health, residential treatment center, wilderness, everybody around them recalibrates their expectations. Whereas before I was hoping you would get into an Ivy League school, now I just want you to be happy and safe. Think about that. It's an obvious recalibration. And as a child starts to experience success in our program or in therapeutic contexts, and people get really excited again, of course that fear somewhere in there is going to come up again and say, well, I might as well just fail again. I might as well take control of this anticipatory anxiety and just burn the house down. I would rather, a lot of, when I worked with young women with eating disorders, they would wear baggy clothes. And part of it was because they wanted to hide from the doctors, or they didn't like their clothing touching them. But part of what they said is, if I got accused of being heavy when I was wearing baggy clothing or 2 or 3 layers, I could blame it on the clothing. In other words, I'm going to dress like I look overweight, so that when people accuse me of being overweight, I have something external to blame. I can marginalize the accusation by blaming it on my clothes. Self-sabotage is about pressure. It's about fear. It's about the expectations. And like everything that I talk about and teach, the solution is to come to love your horrible, rotten self. And we do that by experiencing it with somebody else. When somebody else can love our horrible, rotten self, we can learn to love it. So lowering expectations is a major function of the symptom. Sometimes it's just leaking feelings, getting attention. You know the old adage, and I'm sure some of you probably used it or it's been used for you. The old adage that the child or the person is just asking for help. Of course it's not conscious. Of course it's unconscious. But what their symptoms are asking of parents or people around them is for some attention. I need some focus, and I don't have the words, maybe the courage, maybe the clarity to say it out loud explicitly. So my body's going to say it. My actions are going to say it. The client doesn't like to talk about the function of the symptom. The client doesn't want to experience the self-sabotage and regression as anything within their control, because that would put, again, responsibility on them. We have an assignment in our program called the War Story Assignment, where young people are asked to write 2 stories about something they did that was deemed inappropriate or unhealthy or unsafe, and they're supposed to brag about it. And we call that the war story. Talk about all the cool parts of it. You know, we're trying to get them in touch with the truth that doing drugs served them, that cutting on themselves served them, that restrictive eating served them, that school refusal served them in some ways. And so the interesting thing about it is somewhere around half of my students didn't want to do the war story assignment, and they for sure didn't want that story to go home. I would send most of the assignments home, and of course all of the letters. But the assignment that students quote unquote forgot to give me when I was collecting mail and assignments that week, by far the most common one that they supposedly forgot to give me was the war story. You know, the thing that they'll tell you is, yeah, I smoked pot a little bit, but I didn't really like it. And of course, my response is, well, of course you did. If you didn't like it, you wouldn't have done it 2 or 3 or 4 times. Not that you loved every part of it. And I'm sure you can recognize now, sitting out here in the dirt in Utah or Oregon, I'm sure you can see that it came with some consequences and some collateral damage to your life. But the fact of the matter is, it served you. And it's okay. If we don't lean into what that need that was getting fulfilled by this was, we'll never get to a conclusion. But we parents are so afraid, just like they are, of talking about how self-sabotage, how regression, how acting out serves a need, because we're afraid that emboldens it. We're afraid that condones it. We're afraid that it'll become more out of control. But like all of the work that we do, we have to develop a kind of courage, right? You have to let go psychologically of that need for control to be able to embrace and go with the symptom, the defense, the self-sabotage. Sometimes it's great, like I said before, to take control back, to beat them to the punch. This is a quote from Nurture Shock, which I've been quoting a lot this week on my social media. Sure, he's special, they say, but new research suggests if you tell him that, you'll ruin him. It's a neurobiological fact. Self-sabotage, acting out when someone's on the precipice of success or transitioning, is a way of saying, I'm going to take control of this narrative. I'm going to try to split myself off from the intense anxiety I have about disappointing or pleasing my parents, or the therapist, or the program, or the next program, or my grandparents. The list is endless. I'm going to take control, and I'm going to fail on purpose. When I was in the 10th grade, right before I dropped out of high school, I only went to 1 semester of 10th grade. My favorite teacher, Mr. Antonor. He was pretty young at the time. I'm sure he's still alive, kicking around somewhere, teaching some kids something. Um, it just came to me during one class how much I valued him, how much I wanted to be the best. How the razor thin line between success and failure for me was too much pressure to hold. It's part of why later in that semester, dropped out of high school. I purposely got all the answers on one of the tests wrong. And specifically, 15 of them were true and false. So to get 15 wrong means you have to know all 15 answers. That can't be random. And I think even the fact that I got all 15 wrong, I was secretly trying to show him that I knew, but I was also trying not to try. And he called me up after class and after he graded the test, and he called me up and he said, I suspect you knew the answers, otherwise you couldn't have gotten them all wrong. And I played it off and played it cool. He ended up giving me an A on the test. But what nobody was able to uncrack is what was going on with me. Why did I self-sabotage? And it was because being second or third or fifth or getting a B wasn't good enough. Like I said, later on that year is why I dropped out of school. In part, I could not have named it at the time, but I was overwhelmed with the expectations and the praise and the potential that I'd been taught my whole life was there for me. So I took control of it. Some of you have heard this quote. I'm going to read it to you. Before I read it, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to challenge it. I don't believe in it. I don't relate to it. Maybe some of you do, and that's okay. But what I'm teaching tonight is a challenge to this quote. It's attributed to Marianne Williamson. It goes like this. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates us. Maybe it's a play on words, but I don't think she's right. I don't think that people are afraid of having success and being happy. They're afraid of the tenuousness of that success, of being exposed as an imposter. That's right in her quote. Who am I to do this? Right? That's not a fear of success. That's a fear of being exposed as a fraud. And getting to the mountaintop, while it might be a wonderful thing, especially on the way up, when you're there, there's only one place to go, and that's down. And that's what these athletes are experiencing. Simone Biles, and I believe it's Naomi, I think is her first name, Osaka. Leah, you can tell me if I'm getting her name wrong. I didn't plan on talking about her. That's in essence what they're trying to share with us. So the fear of success and the fear of failure is the same thing. We take the parts of us that we don't want to look at and we split them off and we project them onto other people. We take the parts of us that we were told were unacceptable and we reject and deny them. Sometimes they become very small, but sometimes in the dark recesses of our psyche, they become problematic. They come out sideways, right? The shame and the guilt that causes them repression blocks our conscious awareness of them, but then we act out on people. And what it does for us parents is we take those parts of us that we've learned to not express, that we were told were unacceptable, we deny them, we repress them. And then that's why when we look at our children, we feel like that they are some kind of alien to us. how different they are. We look at people in the media on all sides of the political equation. We look at people who do horrendous things and we incredulously say, I'm not like them. And that makes us feel safer. Another quote from the book Nurture Shock, which has a wonderful chapter on the inverse power of praise, says this. Researchers concluded that continued appeal of self-esteem is largely tied to parents' pride in their children's achievements. This feeling is so strong that when parents praise their kids, it's not far from praising themselves. We identify so much with our children's success and failures. We feel so responsible for it that when we're praising them or admiring them or are proud of them, it's almost as if we are getting the credit. It's for us. Taking a curious, detached, the technical word is differentiated perspective with our child is to see them as an individual separate from us. Doesn't diminish our love and our care, but it attributes boundaries psychologically between us and them. Carol Dweck talked about this relationship between praise and esteem. And I've already referenced some of it. They found that when they gave praise to children, depending upon whether they gave it for their accomplishment or for their effort, things dramatically changed. 90% of the children that were praised because of their effort chose a more challenging test subsequently, more challenging assignments. Whereas 50% of the children that were praised for being smart or talented or gifted chose less challenging tasks. And so you're starting to see this relationship between resiliency, between praise, between really what self-sabotage does is it releases the pressure. So often when I'm dealing with clients of any age, I try, it's not really an effort. I'm just not too excited about successes and not too disappointed about failures. And part of what I'm doing is to try to reverse this trend that we're talking about today between this relationship between praise and expectations and progress and everybody's hopes for you. But part of it really is grounded in, I don't know. And I would look at this list of you and I would say, I don't know what you should do. I don't know the right answer. Because the right answer is the one that you figure out, the one that you work through. So one of the things we can do is emphasize effort. I say to parents all the time, the highs really aren't that high and the lows aren't that low. When parents get really excited about their child's progress and treatment, I try to mitigate those expectations a little bit and say, it's not as great as it looks. This is a very small box in a very compressed period of time. And yes, he or she or they are thriving. But take a step back. Life is much more in the middle than these peaks or these valleys. Speaking of emphasizing efforts, again, from the book Nurture Shock, it is said, emphasizing effort gives the child a variable that they can control. They come to see themselves as in control of their success. Emphasizing natural intelligence takes it out of the child's control, and it provides no good recipe for responding to failure. Do you see that? Do you see how that no good recipe for responding to failure could result in self-sabotage? I've told the story about the father who didn't understand why his son was breaking all the rules. And so the dad yelled at him, told me after he'd yelled at him, I know I'm not supposed to do this, Brad. But I went in and lectured and yelled at him. And then I said, well, you then know why he did what he did. because you just did it. You just did what you know, quote unquote, you weren't supposed to do, unquote. So now you can go back there and apologize and say you understand him. They're not that different from you. And again, your work and the richness of your work will make that more and more and more obvious to you. People that are farther along in this process realize that they're a numbskull. People that are new to the work or haven't done much work will tell you how good of a parent or how good of a spouse or how good of a friend they are. The enlightened person doesn't fancy themselves great. The enlightened person sees themselves as human, adequate, and that's enough, and that's worthy of love. It's important that we face our unresolved trauma, because if we don't face it and work through it, and sometimes that takes years or maybe even the rest of our lives. To the extent we haven't worked it out, we don't see our children adequately, and we don't have empathy and patience for them. When an adopted parent tries to win and prove the child that they're worthy of love, they make it difficult for the child to grieve, to be angry, to be confused, to work through it themselves, because they feel the pressure that the parent needs them to feel loved, for the parent to feel like they're doing a good job. Do you see the equation? Do you see why a child might self-sabotage under that kind of pressure of failing the parent and the potential abandonment that could come if they do fail the parent? Parents who are disconnected from all their sources of support, or they use unhealthy, unenlightened family members for support. That's an important thing to realize. Are the people that you're reaching out to, do they have depth and experience? That's why sponsors and adequate therapists are so important. That's why people who've been through what you've been through, but are a little farther along on the journey, can be so valuable. Of course, our inability to tolerate our kids' discomfort is something that they carry around. It sounds like and seems like love, but it's just really about a lack of capacity, a lack of our own work. The more you've felt and moved through your pain, your sadness, your grief, your loss, your hurt, your fear, the more capable you are of sitting with your child in that with them. But you kind of have to find somebody who can sit with it, sit with yours. That's what I realized a few years ago. That because my therapist sat with my horrible, rotten self for so many years, I now can sit with it better than I used to be able to. These things sabotage them as parents, but also as a functioning adult in their own life. We have plenty of things that we do that sabotage our projects, our issues. Like always, the more focus and energy you put into fixing yourself and making yourself the project, if there's one take home from tonight, it would be to say to you, shift the project from your child's mental health to your mental health. Shift the project from fixing your child to fixing yourself, and watch how that change in focus changes your child's feelings and actually changes your child's trajectory. It's fascinating. I sometimes like to explore the parallels between what the child is doing to self-sabotage and what the parents are doing. There's a great line in Addictive Thinking where Abraham Tversky says, mostly he's teaching about addicts and how they think, right? But he talks to the codependents in their lives, right? The family, the parents, the spouses. And he says, they come to me and they ask, what can I do to help? And then I tell them. And they don't do it. And they have all the same reasons for not doing it that the addict has. It doesn't quite fit me. I can't relate. It's not that bad. I can do it on my own, on and on and on. And essentially, what he says, and I love it, he says it's like the client is coming to him and saying, What's 2 plus 2, but don't say 4. The more work you do on your own, the more you listen to these podcasts, read the book, read other books and other podcasts, learn, go to 12-step meetings, go to therapy, the more you'll be able to hold space for your child. To be a self and to support them where they need to go, to have boundaries because you have a self, and to manage and take responsibility for your own anxiety, your own serenity. So what are the take-homes? Remember the function of the symptom. In some contexts, everything everybody is doing makes perfect sense. And the question of why are they doing this is okay to ask once or twice. But to stick with it repetitively is to shame the other person, is to say to the other person, you obviously are crazy that you would do this. Learning response flexibility, being able to, I wrote here, monitoring your response, but being able to even interrupt it. People that are really triggered and anxious, they don't experience it as a choice. Their reaction is knee-jerk, automatic, reflexive. The more work you do, you have response flexibility. You're able to keep intact a connection to your prefrontal cortex, to your higher levels of thinking, and the lower parts of the brain, the fight or flight part of the brain, doesn't take over and hijack it. That's the work in therapy. Get feedback from therapists and sponsors. Hear from other people about what part of it is yours, what are you contributing to, and what part of it isn't yours, and how and where to draw that line. Understanding primary and secondary gains gives you a little bit of language and conceptualization to understand that there's more than one thing being accomplished by behaviors. Thinking of parsimony, thinking of it in the simplest terms possible. What does it serve? Learning to be patient, learning to slow down. That's what wilderness therapy initially affords you and your child, but you can take that experience, hopefully, and carry it into your time when your child isn't in therapy. Slow down. The highs aren't that highs and the lows aren't that low. Ultimately, like everything I teach, like everything we talk about, like everything you get out of individual therapy, it's not for you to repeat to your child or to your spouse. It's for you. It informs you. When I teach you about your children or about anybody, it's for you. It's not to be repeated to your children. It's to inform you so you think about and feel differently as they act out of self-sabotage. That's the adult filter. Learn to be curious. Learn to not know. I was explaining to a newer therapist recently that I was training that as you practice the art and the science of therapy, and as you grow, the reason that people hire you, the reason that people ask me to speak at conferences is because of what I don't say. Because I can be patient and curious. I cannot know. I cannot have answers. And that goes radically against my instincts and my training. And I'm sure most of yours too. Learning to be a safe container, learning to practice self-care, be a self first, but then learning to be a safe container for others. And then be careful of the why question, because it can be very shaming. I'm happy to take a couple of questions, Malia, if some have come in. If none have come in, then I can go to the announcements and take them at the end. I'll do that. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want support, if you want to be with other people who are on this journey or farther along in this journey, we have support groups online. September 9th, this week, that's this week, at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is our next wilderness therapy one. For our intensives alumni, September 14th at 6 p.m. We also have once a month an alumni meeting just for alumni. September 28th is the next one for that 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Email malia@evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, I know I say this every time, but online or in-person intensives are my best offering to you, my best suggestion. So contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. I know we have space in our September online one. It's half the time, less than half the price. If time or resources or money are an issue for you, online is a wonderful, viable option for you. And we have some space in the September one. And then we are doing a returning to you in October. We actually filled the one that we have scheduled up, and we're going to be adding another one soon. Email intensives@evoketherapy for more information. If you want a life coach, a virtual coach over the phone or through Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, Evoke therapists that are attachment-based trained therapists and coaches do online coaching. Contact Travis@evoketherapy.com. Pursuits trips are adventure trips, camping, hiking, adventure activities all over the world from 3 to 30 days, in between programs, after programs, coming back later to reconnect, spending some time with some support. Think therapy light, sober fun, right? It's just a little bit therapeutically supported, but it's customized adventure programming all over the world. We ask all current parents to attend 6 12-step support group programs. 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org are places you can go to find out about virtual or live meetings in your area. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are also other organizations in your area that can offer you wonderful support that are free. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast or go to SoundCloud.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. And on Instagram, you can also find Evoke Therapy Intensives using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog is wonderfully curated by Malia, who is also our moderator this evening. So there's new content each week. The next broadcast will be September 8th, this Wednesday, where I'll be taking any live questions or any leftover from this or the last time. You can also always send questions in between or comments or requests for topics to webinar@evoketherapy.com. Somebody says, can you say more about life coaching? I'm not a question about his talk, but that slide that I flashed. Life coaching is similar to therapy. There might be more tools and teaching and guidance in the context of a specific question, but it also can serve like a 12-step group or a non-therapeutic activity where you're really having an adequate person who understands attachment and history and how it impacts your work today. So you can think of it as therapy if you'd like to, if that's easier for you, but it's just online and virtual. And therapists are typically licensed by in the state that they live in. And the states in our country still provide that you have to be licensed in the state. You can't do therapy, psychotherapy across state lines. So we're not going to be prescribing, diagnosing anything for you. So the coaches at Evoke are wilderness therapists, they're intensive therapists, they're attachment-based therapy trained by me, by us. And so they have this approach. They understand the work that we do, and they'll do it virtually with you wherever you live. So that's what that is. Somebody writes, I hear self-sabotage is about releasing the pressure. And I have a kid who is trying so hard not to try. Actually, let me see if I can find that. Actually joked a little with him about this tonight, and he helped me. It helped crack a smile. However, our expectations are so low right now, maybe even too low. Any thoughts? I mean, the more you talk about it, the more you name it, the more you're able to get him to talk about it, or her or them to talk about it, the better. We can't force them to drink the water. We can lead them to the water, as they say. So you can be safe, but really part of your boundaries are also funneling him back or them back into a space where they have to talk about it. They have to sort it out. They have to get in touch with it. That's why wellness therapy can be helpful, because it's a compulsory therapy, right? You kind of have to deal with it. There's no escape, if you will. Somebody writes, I'm not sure how to word this But my question is about expectations. Too high, too low, none? That's really the question. That's why the foundation of this broadcast, I talked about finding yourself. The question people ask me in relationships all the time is, I don't know if I'm being a doormat or I'm being too rigid. And the answer to that, it's the right question to ask. But the answer is you. There's no right level, and not everything works for everybody else. So it's just sorting you out. And remember, the more you're sorted out by you, the more you can see the other clearly and their needs. So when somebody asks me too much or too little, my answer is that's the right question. And you'll spend the rest of your life answering it. And I can't. You need a safe place to explore it. And I can be that for you if I'm your therapist or your guide or your coach. But in essence, it's something only you can answer, and you get to answer. Somebody writes, when my son is in self-sabotage mode, what is the first step I should take to address it? It's more important what you don't do, right? To get upregulated and anxious, reactive, right? Yelling, screaming, coming up with radical consequences. It's more about mellowing out for starters, being able to maintain some mastery over your fight or flight, to get curious and ask questions in a mellow tone, in a mellow way, to walk away from the discussion, to not have to fix it or solve it or tie it all together right away. Those are all, it's an energy that you bring to it, a curiosity, and a kind of on the journey with you. Maybe I can share some examples where I can relate to you. Somebody says, I see how the ability to hurt our children through constant praise and reward. In reconnecting with my son after treatment, he actually confided in me that our praise and disappointment was all too much, and the pressure of it was killing him. My question is it okay now to express my happiness for what he has achieved? Because after doing my work and him working on his recovery, we both understand that we are coming from a completely different place. Just lower your energy about it. It's not that important that he impress you in reality and in his life. It's like being at your child's soccer game. You want to be on the side cheering, and if they want to look over at you while you're clapping, that's great, but you don't want to stand out. You don't want them to be hearing your voice, right? You don't want to increase that kind of self-consciousness. So show up, cheer, congratulate them, soothe them when they lose, be there for them when they lose. But don't be so loud. Don't take the spotlight. Relax it a little bit. You can't, I can talk about this next comment for hours, for days, but I want to say this to you. Self-esteem doesn't come from praise or accomplishments or admiration. Self-esteem comes from being heard and seen as you are, all parts of you, good, bad, and everything in between. So if you want to know how to increase your child's self-esteem, seeing them, being curious, not too excited with the successes and not too disappointed with the lows and the failures. Any others, Malia? Is that it? I guess that's it for this evening. All right, folks, thank you for joining me this evening. I hope this was a helpful point of contact for you all. I'll finish up the questions and answers this Wednesday. Thank you for joining me this evening. On behalf of your children and those that you love, thank you for doing your own work. Have a great couple of days, and I'll talk to you in about 48 hours. Bye-bye.